Okay. Um, I would entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Second the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries. We have our first item of business is our district audit report. And oh, okay. Okay, Jennifer.
I'm not sure, does it need to be read to be, oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so this is our official truth in taxation hearing for the 2019 Pay 2020 levy. We have really two requirements for these truth in taxation meetings. We need to discuss our current district budget and obviously discuss the 2019 Pay 2020 property tax levy. So starting with our current district budget, this budget was approved in June, so it's usually either called the preliminary budget or the adopted budget. We will have a budget revision probably in February. But right now, the general fund revenue budget, you can see about 84% of that comes from state aids. The biggest factors that generate those funds are what we get in the basic formula from the state and our enrollment. So as our enrollment continues to either grow slightly or stay steady, and if we continue to get improvements on the formula, we should see our revenues go up. You can see though on the next slide that the formula really has not kept up with inflation. And you know, I know sometimes people say, well, you know, this is not really accurate, but in fact, it is very accurate. It shows that since 2002, when you look at the rate of inflation and how much our per pupil funding has gone up, you can see that for FY 2021, which we know what that funding will be from the legislature, that we are behind about $639 per pupil, or 9.7%. If we had kept up with inflation, if the state had, we would have another about $2.5 million coming in revenue. So this is very much a concern for school districts because as you'll see on the next slide, we have over 80% of our expenditures are salaries and benefits. Our most valuable resource, no doubt, is our staff, whether it be our teachers, our administrators, our paraprofessionals, our custodians, but they are by far the largest portion of our budget. When we have to make budget adjustments, that doesn't leave a lot of other areas for us, and some of those are fixed costs. So as we want to continue to afford our staff competitive pay and benefit packages, it does become very challenging based on the funding that we get. And finally, with the current budget, the factors that will impact our revised budget are, as you all know, we are working through contract settlements. When it's 80% of your budget, where we settle will have a large impact. Our enrollment, what our enrollment is this year, and what we look as far as enrollment projections. And then another factor that is going to impact us is under a new GASB, or generally accepted accounting procedures, we are now required to bring in all of our student activity accounts into the general fund. We currently have some under board control and some not under board control. Starting this year, they will all be under board control. And this will impact our fund balance calculation. So that is something that as a board we may be discussing as we move forward. So that's really all I have as far as discussion about the budget. Now we'll move on to the levy. So there are three parts to the levy: the general fund, the community service fund, and the debt service fund. The general fund is by far the largest part, and the levy pieces with the general fund are spread out either over the referendum market value or the net tax capacity. Referendum market value really treats most properties the same. It only looks at house, 1 acre, and garage on ag properties, and residential and businesses are taxed at the same rate under referendum market value. The levies distributed, next slide please, Ashley. The levies distributed over the referendum market value are the local optional revenue, which is $724 per pupil, our voter-approved operating levy, which right now is $566.83 per pupil, equity revenue, and transition revenue. And then every year there are adjustments made to these levies based on actual pupil counts, primarily from prior years. So you can see that the total levy, general fund levy, spread out over the referendum market value is at $3.3 million. The rest of the general fund levy is spread out over what's called net tax capacity. And net tax capacity assigns each property value each kind of property a value depending on what it is. So for instance, residential property up to $500,000 is counted as 1.0 of its value, compared to commercial property value can be 1.5%. The farmland, actually this, if you want to make a correction here, it's actually $1.9 million is discounted at the 0.5%, and over that is 1%. So the levies that are spread out over the net tax capacity are operating capital, our QComp, achievement and integration, unemployment insurance, safe schools, career and technical education, long-term facilities maintenance, and our lease levies. And again, there are some adjustments based on prior year actual numbers coming in. So that number is a little over $2.3 million. Then moving on to the the Community Service Fund, you can see we have about $238,000 of our levy goes to community ed. The basic community education is actually based on our census. And so when we get the new census numbers in, that number will change. It really has remained unchanged for about the last 10 years. Debt service and OPEB debt service is the final component of the levy. And we levy for 105% of our bond payments. That extra 5% is it's added on, and generally it is backed back out again in the adjustments. Once the state looks at what is our fund balance compared to what 105% of our payments are. And so we often see about $100,000 negative adjustment. One thing of interest, the OPEB pension bonds, you can see that that's a large payment. That actually will be our final payment on that bond. The following year, our bond payments remain about the same, but we will start paying on some of our general obligation bonds. And if you go to the next slide, Ashley, this will really have a positive effect on our farmers. There is something called the Ag to School Bond Credit. This came into legislation about 4 years ago. And it is slowly increasing the portion of ag land that farmers pay toward debt service bonds, but it does not include OPEB bonds. So as the OPEB comes off and our general obligation bonds come on, the farmers will start seeing this bond credit. As you can see, it's scheduled to scale up to 70% by 2023, and for next year, it is 50%, and it is currently at 40%, so it's going from 40 to 50%. And then you'll see on the next slide how that will increase over the next couple of years until we get to the maximum of 70%. Then you can see that really if your property has maintained its value, our school taxes have remained very steady. This year, actually, on a $100,000 home, if your home remained at that value, the school district portion of your taxes would have decreased by a slight amount. I know personally, in my case, that's exactly what happened. I live in the district, my home value stayed the same, the school district portion of my taxes went down by a little bit. So unlike in September when we had to approve the levy at the maximum, at this point in time, we have to approve the levy at an exact dollar amount. And that amount for this year is $8,984,345.48. And that is an increase of about $328,800. So that would be the recommendation, is that the board approve the levy at that dollar amount, unless I can answer any questions.
What percent increase is that?
About a 3.8% increase. Fortunately, not only the referendum market value, but also the net tax capacity increased by more than that percent. And so that's why, even though our dollar amount has increased, because it's being spread out over a larger tax base, people whose homes and property did not increase in value really should see no increase in their school property tax.
Okay, any questions?
Well, I just got mine, my little like property tax
Mhm.
thing, and my home value went up somehow. But so what we're talking about doing here, that was already on my property tax
Yes.
thing. So
So
that's
what
my
you
tax-
got
if this
is
what
what
we
you will
agree
pay.
to, and this is what we vote on. Then my property taxes will be as they said on that sheet that I just received in the mail.
That is correct.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I did have another question. Not related to a slide you were sharing earlier, but you were just going. I didn't want to ruin your
Oh,
flow.
yeah, no, interrupt anytime.
When you talked about like the percent, we pay, like that goes to staff and
Yes.
different things. But you also said purchased services was 11%. What would that entail?
So that would entail things like utilities fall under purchase services. Transportation is our largest because we contract with an outside vendor. That would be our largest expenditure there.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. This is item 3.2, I guess, if we're going to vote on it, but we'll go through presentation of the audit report.
Let's prove this first, and then
Okay,
we'll
that's
roll
not what the agenda
roll
says,
into
though.
that. What's that? I
Okay.
think, or do you have it on the agenda to approve later?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have the open.
okay.
All right, so at this point, what I would recommend is if anybody in the audience has any comments on the presentation.
Anybody out there that'd like to talk to the board regarding the levy?
I see two property owners in the district over there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We'll move on to our audit then, report. We have Greg Larson with us, along with Jennifer. I've got it.
So most of you probably know this is Greg Larson. He is the chief accountant that worked on our audit. And before you start, Greg, I just want to say they were really wonderful to work with. You know, it's always a little nerve-wracking coming into a school district where you don't know the auditor, but it could not have been a more pleasant experience. So thanks to Greg and Michelle for that.
She just had to train us a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. My voice is a little bit funky. She said the microphone would take care of it. We'll see. If you have questions about hearing something I've said, just let me know. We'll start off on page 1. Here's some comments that we have here. The very clean audit report. The first thing that talks about your audit opinion, you have what's called a clean audit report. We feel everything is fairly stated. And in the big book you have is 90-page report. I don't get to go through that because I only have a few minutes tonight. The next thing is internal control over financial reporting. Your district has been blessed with some good business managers, have good controls. Here we don't have any findings. And along with the yellow book, no findings, and related to the single audit, no findings. This is the first time probably no findings even for the student activity accounts. The next page is just a comment on the student activity accounts, page 2. But one of the things that Jennifer mentions, you're rolling your student activity accounts into the general fund. You still need to have controls in place, and I think the district has done a job. This was just a reminder here on page 2. Page 3 is communication with those charged with governance. Has some general comments. One of the most important things, I think, is in the middle of page 3, talks about accounting estimates are an integral part of the financial statements. The biggest estimate always in the school district audit is when we estimate what the receivable should be for general ed aid and your special ed aid. They keep updating that number. We took the number as of October. They keep changing the number all the way through March. But this is the best number we had as of the time the audit report was completed. Again, the AICPA language, it talks about difficulties. We encountered no significant difficulties. We had no difficulties here, so I like the wording. But since I belong to the AICPA, if we change the verbiage, I get slapped on the hand when we get audited. So I use the AICPA language. Uncorrected misstatements, Jennifer would not allow anything to go through with uncorrected misstatements. Disagreements, we explain what a disagreement is on the last paragraph, but we're happy to report that I'm not aware of any disagreements here. Management representations, the top of page 4. On November 20th, I reviewed the draft copy of that report with Jennifer and 2 of her staff people, and she signed a letter called the representation letter saying she didn't forget to tell us anything really important, didn't hide anything from us, not aware of any pending litigation, things like that, not aware of any fraud. Management consultation with other independent accountants, this would be the case if you didn't have that clean opinion. You don't have a problem here, so that's not a situation we have to worry about. Other audit findings or issues would be the case if Jennifer, one of the staff people, calls with a question. We assume they want the correct answer. We're not trying to guess which way they want us to answer the question. That's always the way it's been here, and I think Jennifer operates on the same method. There are other matters, are just saying that there's other information in the audit report. And then we have some financial trends. Page 6 shows, this will be very hard to read unless you have your booklet. If you're on page 6, it just shows some detail on the revenues and expenses that go through your general operating fund. I think they're on page 19 of the full-blown audit report. It just breaks down between the different restricted fund balances you have. And then page 7 has some different tables. And then Jennifer will be meeting with the Finance Committee to talk about the fund balance policy. You can see what's happened with your fund balances. Unassigned fund balance since 2015 has gone up gradually and then gradually come back down again. So the ideal thing is just to have an even keel on that fund balance. It did drop a little bit this year. The operating capital fund balance, you did spend down some of that money on the bottom of page 7. Food service fund, you can see how that fund balance, it did go up some this year, and you have a nice fund balance in the food service program. The community service fund, the same thing. That fund balance did go up some this year also. Debt service fund, a little bit different situation you have this year. You issued new bonds this past fiscal year, and when you issued the bonds, The issuer of the bond said there's $1.2 million that needs to be transferred to the debt service fund to help interest that's going to be paid in the 19 fiscal year, the 20 fiscal year, and the 21 fiscal year, artificially inflating your debt service fund balance. Jennifer was talking through the Truth and Taxation meeting that says that if your fund balance and debt service fund is too high, they reduce levies. So she'll be contacting the state MDE department to let them know that you're artificially high because of that transfer. It's there to help, and that basically there so you didn't have to levy for those $1.2 million in interest payments. It was taken care of in the bond proceeds. Average daily membership, this is probably one of the most positive things in the whole audit report. The average daily membership, you can see what's happened since 2015. Very critical to a district to see that those numbers are improving. Jennifer's saying that the trend may be hard to continue this year. We'll see what happens here, but you can see it's been a positive number all the way through these last 5 years. My color chart is not quite as bold as the one you had in your Truth and Taxation. This one is talking about the revenues. The biggest piece of the pie, it shows the revenues coming from state source revenue, 83.35%. The next biggest piece is your property tax levy revenue is 10%. So the taxpayers are paying about 10% of the revenue, and the other pieces would be your federal source revenue and other revenues. District and school administration and support services shows your costs here for the 5 years. And then on the right-hand column, we show 2018 costs for all districts in the state of Minnesota. So those are year-old numbers. And the same with the 985. This would be schools of similar size. So your numbers are trending just a little bit higher. They're very close on all schools, but just a little bit higher than schools your size. Regular instruction, excuse me, it shows that what you spent for regular instruction in the last 5 years, comparing them to schools of all size and school districts of similar size. So again, you can see your district spends a little bit more than the average for schools of similar size. And the same is true with vocational instruction on the bottom of the page. Talking with your finance committee board members, they said that's not all bad, because we're seeing now that a lot of jobs coming up are going to be in the vocational area. So he didn't think that should be an area to cut back on. He said, if anything, maybe you should look at increasing it or maintaining that number. Page 12. Those of you that have been on the school board for a while have seen this before. Your district special ed costs are higher than the statewide average for all schools and schools of similar size. And Jennifer was aware of this too. She said that you have a higher percentage of students diagnosed with special ed needs. And that's just the way the numbers show. Instructional support services, the numbers have gone up and down the last couple of years. I think you felt that was something to do with this is the Q-Comp and the tech devices. You've been spending a lot of money on that the last couple of years, too, to keep up in those areas. Sites, building, and capital expenditures. And this would be general fund costs here. So you can see the 19 costs, 15 or 18 costs are a little bit higher. 18 costs are pretty much very similar to schools of similar size to you. So you're about on the ballpark. Pupil support services excluding transportation. The last couple of years you bumped that up. And again, I think this is some things to do with
So these are our non-instructional computer and software purchases are part of this increase. A lot of this area is our nurses, counselors, social workers. So as we do have wage and benefit increases, we're seeing that some here.
Yep, your 18 costs were very similar to schools of similar size. So it'd be interesting to see a year from now where the 19 costs come in for schools of similar size. Transportation, again, those of you that have been on the board have seen these numbers here lower. than statewide average. You're pretty similar to schools of similar size. And then the food service program, 2018 costs are very similar to schools of similar size. For some reason, your costs were down a little bit this year from what they had been the year before. And the last one surprised me a little bit. Here, this one is a debt service cost. Your debt service costs are lower than the statewide average and similar, but still lower than schools of similar size. Even though you just took on that big piece, your debt service costs have been running lower than the statewide average. So, again, I went through that very quickly. I don't know if there's any questions. No. Your general
Do you want to
fund-
expand on what explain debt service so we make sure everyone
Debt
understands?
service would be the interest and principal payments that you're paying on your debts there. So you have both OPEB debt and regular bonded debt for construction projects. And so the way I think you issued some new bonds, and the OPEB bonds are going to be hit pretty heavy the next 2 years. The levy that you had would be for last year of those OPEB bonds, and then you're going to switch over to paying more on the regular debt. But I think the plan was set up when you set up those new bonds is you try and level it off so the taxpayers aren't seeing a big increase. When you issue that big amount of debt, they're not going to see that debt increase because you're paying off the OPEB bonds before you start levying on the new ones.
Right.
So I'm thinking the taxpayers overall should not see a big increase in their levies going forward based on those levy things. And the big book, the 90-page monster that you have on your desk, there is a piece in there that shows the amortization of the principal and interest on your debt. So you might want to take a look at that to see how that comes to each year. Otherwise, I would like to thank the district.
Could I ask a
Yep.
question?
Sure.
So back on the special ed
Yeah.
graph that I know that you had spoken about and that it's always been higher. So how many more students do we have percentage-wise that are diagnosed compared to other districts? Because it looks like we're paying about 62% more. Do we have 62% more students than the average district?
I think the statewide average is somewhere around 14%, and we're around 20, just over 20% for our special ed. You know, this is a area that I've asked Jennifer to take a hard look at before I even saw the numbers here, as far as what we are doing and how we are doing it differently than other districts. Our numbers are higher with our student count. But we still have considerable, as the numbers attest, higher spending in this area.
And we have talked about this in previous years. What findings were made in that area in previous years about what we were doing differently?
I think the areas that I have at least directed Jennifer to take a look at, working with Tammy, are we have we've seen a significant increase in early childhood identification since I've been here. I mean, probably twice as many kids are being identified in early childhood. So we should be taking a look at that process. The other thing that I would say is we are over 100 paraprofessionals in the district right now, and you know, I think Keith Erickson's last year here, we were down to, you know, low 80s. And so really we need to meet the needs of our individual students, but are we staffing to the most efficient, in the most efficient manner possible? So those are just a few of the areas that we've been looking at.
Would you say that the co-op that we have with Austin, is that helping this, or is that a bigger cost?
I think it is helping because it's taking away some of our more extreme cost for those individual students. So in the bigger picture, I believe that it is helpful. And Dave and I have a co-op meeting, I think, next week, and we'll get an update from them on where the numbers are coming in. But for the first couple of years, it appears to have been more helpful than not.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So this graphs, I was just focused on like comparisons and that was really good. But what does it actually mean? Like
Which
if it-
one are you
like,
looking at there?
what does, so is it per pupil?
pupil.
Okay,
Oh, I'm
that's
sorry.
what I was guessing, but I wasn't sure. At first, I'm
I'm
just
sorry.
comparing them all and halfway through, I was like, I'm not exactly sure. That was my guess, but just
Yeah,
making sure.
it's per pupil.
Okay,
And so
thank
it's
you.
helped that your pupils have gone up. If your pupils had gone down, the numbers would be skewed the other way. That's actually helped you to keep your numbers more level. So that is a good thing.
Okay,
And then also, we've been higher, I think you had mentioned in previous years. Yeah, I think we've always trended higher in district and school administration and support services. Do we have any explanation for that trend?
Well, this year, I'm thinking Jennifer mentioned that she had a transition in position. There might have been some extra costs with that transition. So I'm thinking that's part of the cost there. But
Yeah, so there were a couple of the cabinet members who left that had severance payouts, so that certainly would contribute. Now, I think that really that number stayed virtually the same from last year, from 2018 to 2019.
yeah, it went up $1.
So it's leveled off, but we are a bit above the state average on that.
okay.
One more question. Going back to the special ed costs, I know that sometimes we have to contract our services out through other districts or through organizations. How does that impact that? Quite a bit or not so much?
I would say it is significant that we have to contract out. I can't give you any hardcore data, but when we have to contract out, that's very expensive.
Okay, thank you.
I think the thing with special ed, once you've identified a student with an IEP, you obviously have to provide the services. Because we have identified a significantly higher percent of students is what really drives our expenditures. And I'm not a special ed identification expert, but I do think that that's something worthy of discussion in our district.
Okay, this is an action item to accept the report. If there's no more questions, entertain a motion. Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have motions and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the district audit report signify by saying aye. Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries.
thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now we are on to deciding on 2019 pay 2020 final levy, and I'd entertain a motion there.
Move to approve.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay,
I'm not supporting increasing at the maximum levy. It's my philosophy that we should not look at the taxpayers as just a, source of revenue, that we need to do whatever we can to operate as fiscally prudent as we can, and if there are adjustments that need to be made, to make those. And I would support a lesser amount, lesser than the 3.8. Thank you.
okay. Well, any other comments?
I know we discuss this every year, and I always kind of forget. So this, when we pass this, the amount we pass it by, then that factors in how much other assistance we get from the state, correct?
Correct.
So if we set it at the max, then we'll get more from the state as well.
Correct.
If you under levy, you lose state aid. I didn't provide it this time, but our final levy is the exact same dollar amount as the preliminary or proposed levy was back in September. And at that time, I did give you the comparison of last year to this year. And on the notes, it indicated at each level what state aid came, the amount of the state aid that was identified for operating capital, long-term facilities maintenance, achievement and integration, all of those and more have state aid that comes as part of the total revenue for those sources.
The bottom line for your students at the end of the day is if your property value remained the same, your taxes are going down.
That was going to be my next comment, too.
My comment would be, I think we're all concerned about what the taxpayer has to pay out there. And at the same time, I think we're all concerned that we want to make sure we provide the best possible education we can within our school system. And I guess I will vote for the levy because I think that a 3.8% is what we need to continue to provide students what they need. So, any other comments or questions? Okay.
I'm always hesitant because I don't want to burden the taxpayers either. However, since it actually is going to stay the same, how much everyone's paying, if their home value stays the same, and I don't want to lose out on that state aid. I know that's taxpayer money too, but it's like spread around, and like all the other districts might be getting it, but then we're not. You know, I just don't want to miss out on that, and that's why I guess I support going with the maximum.
And remember, this time we are voting on that specific dollar amount. Reminder.
Okay, we'll call the question then. All those in favor of the 2019 pay 2020 final levy signify by saying aye. Aye. Pose same sign.
Aye.
Motion carries. Moving on to 3.3, which is our custodial employees master agreement. I don't know, Kathy, do you have any comments, or Mike? I'm not sure.
It's pretty much what we discussed within closed session. The salary adjustment for 2019 will go into effect in December. You know, I think we talked about perhaps having it go into effect in January, and everything else is consistent with what we talked about. So that's what I have.
Okay, thank you. What are the wishes of the board?
Well, I was involved in this process, and I would like to congratulate both parties because I thought that it went very well. Both sides were respectful and diligent in their attempt to come up with a settlement that was fair for both sides.
Okay. So is there a motion?
I move to approve.
Okay, is there a second? I'll second it. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the custodial master agreement signify by saying aye. 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 Pose same sign. Motion carries. Okay, item number 5 is going into closed session pursuant to Minnesota statute, section 13D.03 for labor negotiations. I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Okay. All those